For a long time, one of the big questions in astrophysics has been about the origins of the heaviest elements we see speeding through our galaxy. Now, while we have a good handle on where most cosmic rays come from, the absolute heaviest particles, well, they've been a puzzle. This research offers a potential solution to that long-standing mystery. Our solar system is constantly moving through this sort of invisible rain of high-energy particles. We call them cosmic rays. And for decades, scientists have been trying to trace these particles back to the violent cosmic events that created them. For most of these particles, the story is pretty well understood. But when we look at the ultra-heavy cosmic rays, the real heavyweights of the bunch, the picture gets fuzzy. There's a gap in our knowledge, an anomaly in the data that tells us we're missing a piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so let's break this down. The standard theory says that most cosmic rays come from things like supernova, and this theory works pretty well. It predicts that elements that are easier to vaporize are the ones that get accelerated into cosmic rays most efficiently. But here's the problem. An experiment called SuperTIGER found way more ultra-heavy elements than this model can explain. And that anomaly, that's the central problem these researchers wanted to solve.
This mismatch really suggests we need a different kind of cosmic factory, one that's specifically good at making elements through something called the R process. The R process, or rapid neutron capture, is just the set of nuclear reactions that creates about half of all the elements heavier than iron. So the real question the study wants to answer is, what is this special R process source, and how can we figure out which of the leading candidates is the right one? To figure it out, the researchers decided to model the prime suspects. Their goal was to build a simulation to see how particles from each type of cosmic event would travel through the galaxy and what the mix of cosmic rays would look like by the time they reached us here at Earth. So, there are three main candidates on the table. First, you have supernovae. They're common, but they just don't produce a lot of the specific heavy elements we're looking for. Then you have neutron star mergers. These things are incredibly powerful and they're rich in heavy elements, but they're also extremely rare. And finally, you have magnetar giant flares. They're not as powerful as a merger, but they happen much, much more often. Now, this is where the scientific debate gets really interesting. On paper, a neutron star merger seems like the perfect source, right? It's got the power, it's got the right chemical recipe. So why isn't it the slam dunk answer? Well, that's exactly the uncertainty that made this study so necessary. So to test this, the team built a pretty sophisticated computer model of our galaxy. They then simulated thousands of these different events, supernova, magnetar flares, and neutron star mergers, placing them randomly but realistically throughout the galaxy over a 50 million year period. Then, they just watched to see how the particles they produced would spread through the Milky Way and eventually reach us. Now, there's a critical piece of physics in their model, a process called spallation. The easiest way to think about it is like erosion. As one of these ultra-heavy cosmic rays zips through the galaxy for millions of years, it bumps into interstellar gas and starts to break apart, shedding pieces and turning into lighter elements. And here's the crucial point. Spallation basically creates a delivery range. If a source is too far away, its heavy particles will just erode into something else before they can ever get here. This physical limit is exactly why the distance and the frequency of these events are so important. So, with that in mind, let's look at the results and see how this all played out. And this brings us right to the core finding of the simulation. It all comes down to a fundamental trade-off. The sheer power of an event versus how often it happens, close enough for its particles to survive the journey. The data from the simulation was pretty clear. Neutron star mergers, for all their power, create these huge but very rare and very brief spikes in the local cosmic ray flux. Since they happen so infrequently, most of them occur too far away and their particles just get destroyed by spallation. Magnetar giant flares, on the other hand, well, they produce a much more consistent and steady stream. Because they happen so often, there's almost always a relatively nearby source that's replenishing the local supply. And to put a number on it, across 100 different simulations of our galaxy's history, the researchers found that these rare, distant neutron star mergers were the dominant source of ultra-heavy cosmic rays only about 20% of the time. For a bit of context, the simulation also included supernovae. This visualization shows you their distribution, and they really act as the baseline here, the sort of constant, low-level background noise of cosmic rays that are always there, but just can't explain that excess of heavy elements that we see. This quote from the paper really states their conclusion directly. The model shows that at most points in our galaxy's recent history, the steady, persistent stream from magnetar giant flares would be a more significant contributor to the ultra-heavy cosmic ray population than that baseline we get from supernovae. So the simulation seems to be pointing towards magnetars. But it's really important that we talk about the essential nuance here, what this study actually shows, and just as importantly, what it doesn't show. So let's be very clear. This study does not prove that magnetar giant flares are the only source. It's totally possible that a recent, relatively nearby neutron star merger is also contributing to the particles we're measuring today. Also, while the general trend fits, the model's predicted chemical fingerprint doesn't yet perfectly match all the fine details we see in the SuperTIGER data. So in essence, what this study does is establish magnetar giant flares as a very viable and maybe even the most likely candidate for explaining the steady, persistent background of these particles. But to get a definitive conviction, we're going to need more evidence. The case is still open. And this brings us to the broader scientific context. This study nudges our understanding forward. It really demonstrates that for these ultra-heavy cosmic rays, being frequent and nearby can actually be more important than just the raw power of a single event. It also sets up some new, very specific questions that we can actually go out and test. And here's the key to telling them apart. Our theoretical models predict a really clear difference in the chemical signatures from these two sources. Magnetar flares, they're expected to produce very few of the absolute heaviest stable elements, things like gold and platinum, what physicists call the third R process peak. Neutron star mergers, on the other hand, should make them in huge amounts, so that gives us a clear, testable prediction. And as it happens, an upcoming experiment called TIGERIS is designed to do exactly that. It will have the precision, the single element resolution needed to measure the amounts of these super heavy elements and actually see if that telltale signature is there or not. So to wrap up, what can we responsibly say based on this paper alone? This quote from the authors summarizes it perfectly. Both magnetar giant flares and neutron star mergers are still viable candidates. What this study shows is that magnetar flares, because they happen so often, are likely a persistent and significant contributor. And that really challenges the old idea that only the biggest, most powerful events matter. This leaves us with a final thought to consider. The cosmic rays that reach Earth are, in a way, a physical record of our galaxy's most energetic history. And this research suggests that this record isn't just written by rare, universe-shaking cataclysms, but is also being constantly updated by the steady rhythm of more frequent, though less powerful, explosions.